Okay, everybody. Hello and welcome to Navigating the Storms of Change, 5 Keys for Exceptional Leaders to Thrive. My name is Julia Mullaney, and I'm one of the principals here at Exceptional Difference. At Exceptional Difference, we focus on empowering the world's elite engineers, teams, and leaders like you to have the knowledge, tools, mindset, and courage needed to excel in systems engineering. We work with customers to create cultures of excellence. We've been doing this a long time, and we know that it's not enough to know the right thing to do. You have to have the courage and conviction to do those right things, especially when it's hardest. When people start to step up, that's when the cultures begin to change and go towards excellence. Because at Exceptional Difference, we know that one person can change a team and one team can change an organization. And in fact, that's the only way change happens. This next slide is a sample of some of the organizations that we've worked with. You can learn a lot about us. Just go to our website, exceptionaldifference.com. So today, we're really fortunate to have with us David VanEpps. Dave is the Chief Operating Officer here at Exceptional Difference, and he is a highly accomplished leader in his field. He is the epitome of strategic expertise and dedication. His career has been shaped by working with visionary leaders at prestigious organizations such as Xerox, Axiom, OnStar, and Ursa Space. We are really lucky to have him. We want to make this talk as interactive as possible, so feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A area, and then what we'll do is we'll take all questions at the end of the session. So please join me in welcoming David VanEpps. David, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, so this picture was taken after what started off as a beautiful summer afternoon. We were boating on Lake St. Clair, which is right by my house. It's about 25 miles in diameter. It runs between Lake Huron and Lake Erie, has the international shipping channel, so we're frequented by freighters. It's small enough to be a lot of fun and get around easily. It's big enough to be dangerous. On this particular day, the weather apps, plural, all said 1% chance of rain. So we decided after a fun day of boating to go grab some early dinner on the water, and then we were getting ready to head home. Some of the people who were coming in said, you might not want to go out there. Storms are coming and it's going to get uglier. So I looked at my weather apps, again, multiple, don't just want one data point. I wanted to confirm. And the apps all agreed that the storm was at least an hour away. Well, I knew it only took 30 minutes to get home. So I said, we can beat this. Let's go. And you know where this is going. So as soon as we get through the channels, we get out into open water, we turn, and this is what we're looking at coming our way very fast. Unfortunately, at this point, waves are small, but I realized we misread the winds of change. Very quickly, 60-mile-an-hour winds were upon us, and our 25-foot boat was taking in a lot of water as waves were just crashing over the front. And for the first time in my boating life, I was scared. I'm here, I'm presenting, so you know it was a good outcome. Thankfully, the storm lasted 30, 40 minutes. I think the wind controlled where we went more than the boat did because it was pretty hard with the winds. But eventually, when it subsided, we got home and I learned a lesson. So we're going to talk today about the winds of change. And I think we all would agree that times are more volatile than ever, and we face a lot more challenges than ever before. So this year started out and it seemed like it couldn't get worse, and it seems like it has. So what are some of the worries in the world? Well, given the last couple of weeks, extreme weather events made its way up to the top of the list. Generative AI seems like a cool thing when you want to generate pictures or write a paper for school. But when you see what the cyber criminals are doing and all the other criminals are doing with GAI, tends to make us a little nervous. We're facing water shortages, blockages of the Panama and Suez Canal and the shipping. You might have noticed it's election year, and we have a very polarized set of politics here in the U.S. We also have geopolitical challenges. There's wars, there's aggressions, and I don't know about every day, but pretty close between the Middle East and South China Sea. There are a lot of acts of aggression between the US, usually on the receiving end, from countries that don't like us as much. Raw material shortages, supply chain, changes in workforce dynamics. Have you noticed it's harder to get people to want to work or to want to work like a normal week that you might consider a normal week, or maybe even a combination of remote, hybrid, and on-site? And then, of course, we have the wisdom gap, a term if you're not familiar with, also called silver tsunami. But we are facing an unprecedented rate of 50s and 60s senior people exiting the workforce. And what we're quickly learning is that the next generation hasn't been completely prepared to take over that leadership. So volatile, and yes, a lot to keep on mind. So where do we start? Let's start off with a Stephen Covey principle. These are your circles of concern, influence, and control. Your circle of concern at the outside. These are things you can't control, most of which we just talked about, you can't control. Wars, shipping issues, workforce challenges, weather events. You can't control it. It often consumes energy and time, generally in the form of worry and stress. Then you move in and you get to the circle of influence. You can often influence others. You can affect outcomes. You can drive change. People whom you don't directly control, but you still have the ability to make a difference. And finally, in the center is the circle of control. This is a situation, if you have little kids and you need to go somewhere, you tell them to get in the car, they get in the car. Teenagers, you're on your own. If it's your work team, you can assign resources to work on things based on what you need done. You have an element of control that you don't have once you go outside that green circle. So what does this have to do with storms of change? Well, in storms of change, you want to focus on making sure you grow your influence, grow your control. Now, you may not always be able to grow your control, but you can always affect how much influence you have. So let's start off with some examples. If you are a person who is always reacting adversely, if you are somebody who you miss your deadlines, you're not performing, maybe you're panicking, guess what? Your circle of influence is going nowhere. So focus on being proactive. This is where you look ahead. If you are, an information security professional, you may say, hey, there's a lot of aggression and wars going on between countries like Russia and Ukraine. We better up our game and be ready. You might want to proactively tell everybody, make sure your system's up to date, make sure you've got the latest patches downloaded, make sure you're not clicking on links, because we want heightened awareness that there may be more cybersecurity attacks. Lead with value. We'll talk about this more later, but generally think value is what's most important to your customers and your organization. Picture a software engineer going in and talking to an executive and saying, hey, we need to make a change because, module XYZ is going to run out of memory, and then the Kubernetes will get stuck and it'll get hung up and it'll freeze up the processing and we'll get a bunch of 402 errors, versus the same engineer who goes in and says, hey, we do a lot of processing for our biggest and best customers. That's what drives our revenue. And if we don't deliver this service, we're not only going to see revenue impacts, but we're going to have brand reputation damage and we're going to get service level penalties impacting the bottom line. Therefore, we need to make this technical change. Okay? Leading with value is how you position things to people who don't speak your language. Deliver quality. Nobody will probably ever pat you on the back for delivering quality, but I promise you, if quality is absent, people will notice and you'll hear about it. Own speed to value. Notice we didn't just say speed. Oftentimes people say go faster. Well, the question is go faster to where? We had a client not too long ago who talked about a project that was going to be delivered in 3 years. And an executive came along and said, I need this done by next August. Go faster. We've all heard it before. So the question was, why? What it turned out to be was he had made a promise that some feature of this product would be available next August. Well, we were able to look at it and say we could actually resequence the delivery to get that feature out in August, and the rest of the project could stay on schedule. So that was speed to value, not just speed for the sake of speed. And make commitments you can meet or beat. Again, you'll never increase your circle of influence if you're always late, if you're always missing reports on time, if you're always, if you can never do what you say you're going to do. And lastly, have data to support your proposed actions. It's great to come in with emotion. It's great to come in with passion. But when you can back up your position with data, you very quickly grow your circle of influence. So these are going to be very important as we talk about how do we respond to times of change. Now, in the times of storms, we need exceptional leadership more than ever. And I think if you look at the world happenings these days, you can agree. So we're all leaders. I assume that's why you're here. And as leaders, you have to be aware of the concerns. Remember, circle of concern, outermost circle. You got to be aware. You've got to think about it. It can't consume you because as leaders, we have to know where and where not to apply our time, finances, and energy. We have to be prepared to lead during the upcoming storms of change. So the 5 keys we're going to get into here. First of all, accept the call into adventure. Next, we'll talk about focusing on value. Third, we'll talk about mastering the art and science of planning. Fourth, we'll talk about communicate, communicate, communicate. And last, we'll hit invest in yourself, invest in your team, invest in learning and coaching. So let's start off with accepting the call to adventure. Don't panic. Mistake number 1. I know leaders who've been praised because they can remain calm in the face of any adversity, and everybody wants to work with these leaders. I once worked with a guy in a data center who, whenever the system console went yellow, he would literally jump up from his desk and sprint throughout the building. Sweat was pouring down his face, breathing 100 times a minute, and just screaming, "Get in the conference room. We have a problem. We have a problem." And he couldn't think straight. Okay, you can't panic. I worked for a client named Bob at one point, and whenever I'd have bad news and I'd tee it up with, "Bob, we need to have a difficult discussion," he'd actually smile, say, "Come in. Is anybody dead?" And I'd kind of laugh and say, "No, Bob, nobody's dead." "Is anybody bleeding severely?" He was half joking, but half serious. I said, "No, Bob, nobody's bleeding seriously." He said, "Then let's sit down, let cooler heads prevail, and we'll solve this." So, mistake 1, don't panic. Mistake number 2, we've all seen people who, in the face of adversity, turn into ostriches, right? Bury your head in the sand, hide. The idea here is bad news rarely, if ever, gets better with time. Don't deny the changes. Don't hide. Don't delay the call to adventure. You're going to get dragged in whether you like it or not. And the delay is just going to end up costing you. So what do you do? Well, the best thing to do is be like Bob. Be the center of calm. We can't live in the luxury of denial. We also have to get through the grieving process more quickly than others. The grieving process affects us when people pass, but it also affects us in times of change. If you had let's say there's a storm coming, or let's say there's a war, or let's say there's a major hurricane on the way, first thing you'll do is deny it. I don't believe it. That can't really be happening. Then there's anger. Picture like a major org change at a company or a big shakeup. People can get pretty angry over this. Okay. Then you get the bargaining. How can we do something about it? How can we negotiate our way through it? Then once you realize there's nothing you can do, then you get to a little bit of depression. And lastly, acceptance. When you're in a storm of change, your team is going to be going through this. You need to get through the grieving cycle faster than they do. We call it see reality, accept reality, deal with reality. You can't deal with reality until you accept it. At this point, part of your calm is also to do what we call take a strategic pause. I stole this term from a guy I used to work for named Don Grauman. He wrote an excellent business book called Strategic Pause. The idea is when you get into turbulent times, into the storms of life, take a step up, look big, look broad, think about big picture, and then come up with a plan of action versus my friend Greg, who would sprint around the building. Take that pause, put things into perspective. And watch the storm fronts. My wife likes to say that when there's danger, she often gets that feeling, that sixth sense, and she's usually right. On the day I described earlier with the storm, kind of saw the clouds, kind of felt the air was different, should have leaned on experience and instinct and not just relied on data, much less data that had already been wrong once that day. So listen to yourself. If you're thinking something, if you believe something, there's probably a reason for it. Write it down. A good practice when you're in the midst of a storm is keep track, keep a log. What are you doing about the storm? What should you be doing? How can you mitigate the possibility of it happening or contingency? What could you do if this storm hits? Maybe you're looking at the wisdom gap. We work with a client who has been struggling with the wisdom gap. They have a lot of 50-plus-year-old engineers looking at retirement, have not adequately prepared the next generation. So they're trying to figure out, how do we get these engineers 20 plus years of experience on top of what they already have? They're looking at things like, let's get them more high-end training. They're doing more networking events, both with each other and with the current leaders, so that they can have more conversation, more communication, more engagement, more understanding. They published some field guides. We helped them write these field guides and publish them, so employees can see examples and use cases and some of the folklore and the stories and some of the best practices that they've accumulated, but put it in black and white so they always have it. They're involving junior engineers in more of the quote yuck assignments, those jobs you hate, but when you look at 10 years down the road, you're like, wow, that was the best experience I ever had. And sometimes they're just pulling them into more problem solving. So write it down. Think about what you're doing and how you can do more. Keep an eye on the storm fronts and be ready for change. And lastly, accept the call to adventure. Kind of the title of this section of it, right? The cold hard truth, when you took the job, you took all the messiness that came with it. Maybe your predecessor was terrible. Maybe your predecessor was great. It doesn't matter. You inherited the problems. You have to deal with what's ahead. So you have to take this reality and figure out what to do with it. You can deny it, you can panic, or you can accept and embrace the adventure. Okay, key number 2 is keeping a constant focus on value. We got a nice picture of a spooky forest here. And you know what happens to people in spooky forests, especially in the month of October, Halloween? They get lost. And we all know what happens to people when they get lost in the forest during Halloween. We see it on Friday the 13th and all the other horror movies. But what happens is some leaders don't bubble up. They don't take that strategic pause. They dive right in to the granular tasks. Situation once when the CEO of a company that was in deep trouble decided to take probably 3/4 of his company as he was trying to fight for money to keep the company alive, and had them work on a spreadsheet that probably had 40 tabs and thousands and millions and billions of rows and columns. Turned out to be a very useless exercise, but he was so focused on the granular just to do something to keep busy. So that's the mistake. Leaders need to step up the game and take it up a level. We talked about value and what exactly is value, and I told you I'd come back to it. So value encapsulates how well a product solves a problem, fulfills a need, or enhances a user's experience. We use words like useful or benefit or the worth that the customers, the stakeholders, the organization gets out of it. We like to measure value in terms of things like user satisfaction or user experience, functionality, quality, innovation. Sometimes something brand new has value because it's new. Cost effectiveness. This is probably the most common thing, right? If you buy a car that's X years old and has Y miles on it, but you get it at a really low price, you look at that as a good value. If you bought that same car for a higher price, it would be a bad value. So sometimes it's the cost effectiveness. Time to market is part of value. Sometimes it's speed. There is value in getting something out to market quickly. And for those of you in the IT arena, you know that the ilities come into play when it comes to value. Scalability, flexibility, reliability, maintainability, all the ilities play in here. Value is also a language that when spoken can align perspectives. It can align engineers, leaders, and executives. And I mentioned before the example of Uh, the nerdy engineers saying that we're going to have error code 30216 and we'll shut down processing in Kubernetes versus the one who talks to the executive about the impact of customer sat, brand reputation, bottom line, top line, revenue growth, all those things. So it's making sure you understand what's important to your leadership and talk to them in a language they understand. Okay, next up, when you're in the time of storm, follow your North Star. This is part of the whole value prop. Okay, focus on value, follow your North Star. So everybody needs a why, a purpose, a mission, a vision, a direction, an understanding of the value you deliver. That makes up your North Star. I know we like to pick on mission statements and vision statements, and there's cartoons like Dilbert that made an entire existence out of picking on the silliness of corporate mission statements. But when done right, a mission is a rally cry. Understanding your value is a purpose. Understanding your company's values and what your behaviors are helps you to understand what are the boundaries, the guidelines that you work within. Julia mentioned some of ours right up at the beginning. What are core fundamental beliefs? So you have this system of guardrails and directions, and that's what kind of guides your actions. It works for you personally and professionally. I think everybody should have a personal purpose. What is your purpose? What is your why? Maybe even a personal mission statement or a personal vision, one for your family. There's a managerial skill called leading through ambiguity. And the first thing they say is go back to your mission, go back to your vision, go back to your values. Think about it. If you've ever raised teenagers, God bless you. But if you have, there's no book, there's no manual. And that is the ultimate example of leading through ambiguity and leading through storms, quite frankly. Love them, but my gosh. What you have to do here is focus. Like, what is our family values? What is our vision for the child? What is the mission, the purpose of why we're here? And stay at that level. Because if you ever try to get into the day in and day out and all the details of what teenagers are doing, you will lose your freaking mind. Okay, enough North Star. So, number 3, master deep planning. Um, and think about it. Would you ever go on a road trip without having a planned route? I love the app Waze. It's a great app because it does a few things that we should do in life, right? It plans, it replans, it uses historical data, it uses data, period. It responds to the storms that come along. There's a crash 5 miles ahead on the route, it reroutes you. There's heavy traffic, it reroutes you. There's a cop on your road, it warns you. So it does a lot of things with data to plan, and replan. So the mistake is not planning at all. And sometimes the answer in a time of storm is it's not going to make a difference anyway because we can't control what's going on. And that's right, you can't control everything that's going on. But when you have a plan, you can adapt, adopt, and overcome. So co-create your team's playbooks. Football teams have playbooks. Basketball teams have playbooks. FEMA has a playbook. Sure, it's been under scrutiny before, but they have a playbook. EMS has playbooks. Fire departments have playbooks. Everybody has playbooks that they update, manage, and use in times of crisis. Just imagine a fire department pulling up on the scene without a playbook. And everybody gets there and says, what do we do now? What do you want to do? Not a good picture, especially if it's your house. So you want to have a playbook. You want to start with value. Articulate your values so that you know in the times of storm where you're going. Understand the measures of success. These two can guide you through ambiguity, guide you through storms. What are the key metrics? Because the key metrics usually point back to value. Know the roles. Again, fire truck rolls up at the scene, house fire, the person, even when the alarm goes off, the person who's driving knows that they'll be driving. The person who is going to hit the hydrant knows that they're on the hydrant. The person operating the pump knows their role. The person who grabs the line and runs in the house on attack, they know their role. Everybody has a role. It's defined. They know where to go. Your team should be the same. And you should have processes, procedures, policies, scripts, checklists, whatever it is. You should have documentation of what you need to do, and you should have a plan. It should be a rational plan. It should be a plan everybody believes in, everybody is involved in, and everybody is committed to. And like we said before about ways, you're going to plan, execute, you're going to do a retro, and you're going to do a replan. As you do that, you collect historical data. More importantly, you get practice and you get better. If you don't plan until you get into the storm, you're going to be in trouble. You will not have a good plan, and I can promise that. The art of planning requires that you do it over and over and you get practice. And the science is when you bring in the data. Picture the first time you ever painted a room. This might be a dangerous one. You probably looked and said, well, let's see, I can tape it off. Or maybe if you're like me, you said, I don't need to tape. I can do a nice fine line. That happened once and only once for good reason. So you might think, I could tape this room up in 20 minutes and I could then trim it pretty quickly and run the roller. Yeah, I could have this room knocked out in 4 hours. No, you can't. The problem is we overestimate the time available. For example, if I said I could get that done this weekend, the first thought would be get up at 9 a.m. on Saturday and I can paint from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and Sunday 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Easily, I got 24 hours, no problem. But we got dinner plans on Saturday, we got church Sunday morning, maybe the kid needs a ride to soccer practice. All of a sudden, you have less time available than you thought. And guess what? That's true at work too. We find organizations to track their data tell us they have between 15 and 23 hours typically that they can apply to tasks. You'd think it was 40. It's not. 15 to 23 on average. Okay. The next thing we do is we'd underestimate the tasks and we'd assume everything would go perfectly. So that's another problem we all have with estimation. We do happy path estimation. Oh yeah, I'll cut my lines. It'll all be perfect. No, if I do the project, I'm going to spill the paint. I'm going to slop it over the tape and get it on the wall. I'm going to have to go back and clean up. I'm going to have to touch up with the other color. I'm going to, mess up a few things here and there. I'm going to miss some spots. Lots of rework. So I end up underestimating the task. That's why you plan, execute, retro, repeat, repeat, repeat. And of course, have some alternate plans. Now, this may be a little extreme, but one of our exceptional difference partners is Alan. He lives in Ithaca, New York. And I'm guessing his son, not he, loves to go to Clyde's Reptile Land. And you can see here he picked some different routes, and none of them are very attractive if you want to go to Clyde's Reptile Land. But sometimes maybe you think out of the box and suggest a helicopter. Now, is Alan going to go buy a helicopter? No. But when you're in a storm situation, anything's on the table. And at least if you go back to your leader and say, I need a helicopter, and your leader says, no, it's cost prohibitive, at least you've brought value. At least you've put it in their hands to make a decision. So think about, what are the helicopters? What are the things that are out of the box? What are those unusual suggestions that nobody else would think of? Have some alternative plans prepared, but have the realistic ones. Don't forget the unrealistic, or maybe let's say the less realistic, and you can at least get those on the table. Key number 4 is communicate changes concisely and clearly. You may have seen this mistake before. Sometimes you're going to get, let's say it's an org announcement because they're reorganizing. Or maybe your company's got some bad news and you're going to take pay cuts or lay people off or furlough or something like that. And you've all seen the CEO get up there and explain it, and they can't explain what they're talking about. They just get stuck in the detail and they wallow, and they don't tell you what impacts you, or they don't tell everybody at once. Or sometimes they blame others. They blame their predecessor, and they spend too much time dodging accountability, and the message gets lost. This can happen so many ways, and many of them are bad. But let's look at an approach that works. Surprise, lead with value. So, everybody has one question on the top of their mind in the time of storm. What does this mean to me? If you're communicating an org change, guess what everybody's thinking? What does it mean to me? If you're introducing a layoff or a furlough, guess what everybody's asking? What does it mean to me? Any change has to address that question. And you lead with value. You don't start off these messages with the bottom line, or not the bottom line, but the details, right? Start high level. Talk about the value that's at stake. Talk about the purpose. Talk about the why. Remind everybody. Seek alignment. Then you bring the bottom line up front, the bluff. What's the change? How does it impact the audience? And what do they need to do? Simple. That's what they need to hear. You don't need to go into a lot of the why, a lot of the details, or the speculation. Important to note what's the same and what's different. And then allow people to ask questions. Also important, validate emotions. And I'll go through an example in just a minute. But it's important that people know that you care what they think. And lastly, communicate, communicate, communicate. My friend Dave came up with this quote. I thought he came up with it. I always attributed it to him until I learned it's Googleable. Be brief, be bright, be gone. Those are the situations when you're in crisis management. You want to be very clear, very succinct, very to the point. We had a situation 7, 8 years ago, and my client had decided they were going to insource. We had 22 people doing a job for them, and they were going to insource this function, and everybody who did it had to be at their client's site. Well, 4 out of 22 people were on the client site, so they hired those 4, but that meant 18 people on my team were going to lose their jobs in 90 days. Difficult conversation. We had to start with value, talk about what they do, why it's important to the industry, why it's important to the company. Then we had to hit them with the bluff. Here's the change. In 90 days, 18 of you are going to lose your job. Ugh, hard message. How does it impact? We just said it. What do they need to do? Until that time, you are still in this role. You are going to still do what you've been doing. However, we have negotiated reduced workload. You are going to be quickly handing things off to the 18 people that they've hired. And you're going to spend a majority of your time over the next 90 days looking for a job. So we told them what's the same, what's different. We then validated emotions. I realize some of you don't believe this is happening, and I don't want to break it to you, but this is the reality of the situation. Okay? Grieving cycle, denial, anger. Some of you are probably pissed. So I heard this last night. I was beside myself. I am very unhappy about it. Okay? Validate the emotions if they're angry. Bargaining. Said, hey, we went back to the client immediately and tried to renegotiate this. Unfortunately, this dictum is coming from their CEO, who is way above these guys on the food chain. There is no negotiating. There's nothing we can do. So again, validate the people who are bargaining. And depression. I said, I realize this sucks. This is not a good situation. None of us are happy. But here's what we're going to start doing. And as soon as you're ready to accept what we've just put on the table, that it's real, let's start helping you find a new job. Okay? Very simple message, very clear. But again, what does this mean to me? And lead with value. Last, invest in learning. We've heard the classic mistakes. We've made fun of the classic mistakes. Just work harder, or work smarter, not harder, right? How well has that worked for everyone? Don't ever assume you're the only one who's experienced a storm like this. Don't stop reading and learning, and don't ignore people who walked in your shoes before you. There's a lot to be learned from their experience. Instead, invest. Invest in yourself, invest in your team, invest in your people. How often have you seen an Olympic athlete without a coach? You don't. All elite athletes have coaches, somebody who knows how to help them get there. You can consider having coaches by your side. Maybe it's a professional mentor in your company, out of your company. Maybe it's somebody else you know who can help you and guide you. Maybe you hire. We can help mentor you, but it can be somebody who can help you invest in yourself. Now, little tip you may not have thought about. If you take 5 minutes a day, every work day before you start your day, and you read 5 minutes, just 5 minutes of your day, read. At the end of the year, you'll have put in about 20 hours of learning and training. Turn that 5 minutes into 10 minutes, and you give yourself 40 hours of investment and training. It's worth it. Pretty simple cost. At least I think so. So invest, learn, train, and don't give up. So where does that put us? First thing, accept the call. We all have heard there's people who make it happen, people who watch it happen, and then, of course, the people who wonder what just happened. So get in the game, own it, embrace the adventure, and lead. Just lead. Number two, focus on value. Know your why, your purpose, mission, vision, values, priorities, key metrics. What's important to your customer and your stakeholders? What's your North Star? Focus on it, follow it. Number three, master deep planning. Take that step back, that strategic pause, assess the situation, and just like Waze, calculate your route, plan, execute, retro. Gather historical data, apply it, and replan. Too many times we think projects, we just plan and then run the plan until the plan doesn't work anymore, and then you wing it. The idea is replan, 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 especially in times of trouble, because the only way you can do it is if you have these standard operating procedures and plans and everybody knows what their role is and what to do. Number four, communicate early, communicate often. Keep it in see, spot, run, simplicity. Remember those books as kids? See, spot, run. Perfect for executives because lots of pretty colors, lots of big pictures, lots of big fonts, and very simple messages. Communicate. The question is, what does this mean to me? Be brief, be bright, be gone. And number five is invest in learning, invest in expert coaches, invest in your team, invest in yourself. Make your culture a culture of excellence where everybody wants to be a part of the action. Life is a journey full of challenges and experiences. We can let the storms of life subdue us, or no matter how big the storm is and how daunting the outcome seems, we can choose an attitude of strength and resilience. Indeed, one person can change a team, and one team can change an organization. That's the only way change happens. So have the courage to be the change, take ownership, lead, and make a difference. Julia, you want to wrap us up?
Absolutely. So thank you, Dave, for a wonderful presentation, and thank you for attending today to everybody. And I hope you're inspired to take these steps to be an exceptional leader. We're always here to help. We have two learning opportunities coming up, the Exceptional Engineering Experience, and also a course focused on leadership. It's going to be an immersive leadership experience focusing on tackling leadership's biggest challenges. So you can reach out to hello@exceptionaldifference.com, and we'll be happy to get you signed up and on the registration list. On our website, we also have, we have blogs that we publish regularly. You can go see those. You can sign up for our newsletter, and you can also find out about our November talk. So again, thank you for your time. We appreciate you and enjoy the rest of your day.